What's up, YouTube? My name is RJ. I'm with Harbuck Media. Today, we're going to discuss, should you do an audio podcast or a video podcast? If you're thinking about doing a podcast, you might be wondering, should I go the path of audio only or should I incorporate video into my podcast? But before we get into the content today, if you would, drop us a like. It really just helps with the algorithm. And if you're not a subscriber, I'd like to encourage you to become one today. And don't forget to smash that notification bell so that you're notified of all of our upcoming video content. We post a video just like this one every week, and we have shorts that come out throughout the week, Monday through Friday, every day. If you have a question or a comment about this video or any of our previous videos, or just a question about creating videos for your social media in general, drop it down in the comment section. We will do our best to respond as quickly as possible. We would love to have that dialogue with you, and if it needs to be turned into a more full-length conversation, we'd love the opportunity to use that topic to make a video just like this one. All right, let's get started.
Fire and water meet, going down deep. Sing, bury me, carry me, far beneath. Down to the river.
Should you do an audio podcast or a video podcast? Again, this is saying that you have already decided, I am going to make a podcast. Now you're trying to determine, should you make an audio only podcast or a video podcast? Audio only meaning just purely audio, no video component to it. Doesn't mean that you can't share that audio on social media. It just means that you're not recording with a video camera. You're only recording with a microphone and only broadcasting that audio. And a video podcast does not mean that you don't share an audio only format of that video podcast. It just means that you are adding a video camera element to your podcast setting so that you can do both audio only and video podcast. So, what are the pros and cons? Should you do a video podcast over an audio podcast? Well, at the end of the day, just like everything else, it's going to be purely up to you. And one of the main factors is probably going to be price. But we're going to break this topic down into 5 different sections and discuss those today. Should you do an audio podcast or should you do a video podcast? So first, videos perform better. This is something we've already discussed and already covered a multitude of times. It is well known at this point, at this phase in the conversation, that video just outperforms everything else. It outperforms images, it outperforms text, and yes, it outperforms audio only when it comes to social media. Now, podcasting is a little bit different. I am not saying that a video podcast outperforms an audio podcast. What I am saying is that pulling clips, pulling snippets, pulling highlights from your podcast and posting a video form of that podcast, specifically a video with a face. You can do video forms with lyrics or words, that go along with your podcast. You can post a video that has a waveform and that kind of stuff, and you can share reels of audio only. There are ways to do that, but specifically the use of a camera on a face, that form of podcast, that form of video podcast is going to outperform an audio only form of video podcast when it comes to those things like reels and shorts. So one thing you may not think about when considering creating an audio podcast is that you're going to have to share that audio podcast through a service like Buzzsprout, and then that will broadcast it to all your different podcasting apps like Spotify or Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Amazon Music, whatever you decide to host your podcast on, that Buzzsprout is going to send, or whatever service you decide to use, that's what's going to send that to those platforms. What it does not send to is YouTube, because again, it's audio only. However, when you use a video podcast, you can host that podcast on a site like YouTube. You don't have to use YouTube, but the point here is that you can grow a YouTube channel with your podcast. Not only are you posting that audio only podcast to all of those podcasting apps, but now you can take that video component and put it on your YouTube channel along with your clips and your business videos that you're already making. And now you have more content, a longer form content that will hopefully get you new views, get more eyes on your channel, and help you grow your channel. That is definitely a plus and something that should be considered. So the last pro for doing a video podcast that we want to discuss today, before we get into some cons, is that video provides more context. As you're doing a video versus audio, you're able to share things. You're able to share emotion through facial features, through hand gestures, but you're also able to share other video components. If you want to discuss a video that is affecting your industry, if there's some video that you have put out yourself or that someone else in your industry has put out, some new product, or even, something like Apple or Google or YouTube or whatever, they put out some sort of video and you want to discuss it in your podcast, having that video form is easier to view and to understand what's happening because you share that video on your video podcast and it gives more context to the listener, to the viewer. Whereas an audio podcast, you're missing that visual component and it may be harder to interpret what is actually happening. I'm sure we've all listened to an audio podcast where they've shared a video and then they have to kind of talk you through what's going on. And you may still have to do that if you have an audio only component that you are also sharing, but you get more context from a video podcast. Therefore, your viewers can understand what you are seeing and what you are saying more clearly. Now, for some of the cons of doing a video podcast, specifically, it's going to take more work. Doing a video podcast is going to require more work on your part or on your editor's part. Not only are you having to now share that video to something like YouTube, whereas with an audio podcast, you were really only putting it into your service provider, again, such as Buzzsprout, to share your podcast across all the different podcast apps. But now you have to edit that video podcast and share it to your multiple video platforms. There are services out there that help with this process. One of my favorites is Riverside.fm. They have a great system that allows you to use something like a webcam or a camera plugged into a computer and record video of multiple people and audio. And then they even have ways to help you cut it up into clips and format it for different social media pages. It's just a really well thought out application specific to video podcasting. But even if you use that software or if you use some other software to record and edit your video podcast, it's still going to require the extra steps of not only purchasing the equipment for video and for editing, but recording that equipment and ultimately editing that video footage and then sharing it to social media. Now, we are assuming at this point that you are going to share clips either way, regardless of whether you're doing podcast audio or video, you are going to share clips of that podcast to your social media pages. Editing audio is a little bit faster than video. So even in that instance, it would require a little bit more work, a little bit more time and energy to edit that video and post it to your multiple social media pages. However, is the extra work worth it? Again, we've already proven that videos outperform everything else on social media. So, a little bit more work, a little bit more views. Do they outweigh each other? Lastly, we have to talk about the fact that it's going to cost more money. The truth is that recording a audio-only podcast does not require a lot of equipment. It requires a subscription with a service like Buzzsprout. Again, I just keep using that one. There are a lot out there, but you have to have a subscription with a provider like that, which is fairly nominal on a monthly basis. And then you have to do a little bit of legwork connecting the different, podcasting apps to that service. And then you need a microphone and a computer to record it to. If you don't have a computer, you can just use a little digital recorder or use your phone and upload it to the service. It's really, really easy to record an audio podcast. And as I stated in the last section, audio is easier to edit than video. It just is. You have the audio component only. With video, you have audio and video. So of course, it's a little bit easier to edit that audio only podcast. And because there's less equipment, there's less cost. Now you're doing video, you have to buy the webcam or buy the camera that you're going to use. You have to have the software to edit the video. You're probably going to need help setting up that equipment or even help editing the video if you're not going to do the editing yourself. Maybe you could have managed doing the podcast editing on your own, but when it comes to video, it's just a little bit outside of your range, and now you got to pay an editor. And video podcast is going to cost more to edit than an audio podcast. So not only is there the additional upfront cost of the equipment, but now you have the additional cost in editing and managing that content as well, as you're now posting to things like YouTube. So it is more expensive. Does that return on investment balance out? Depending on who you are, depending upon the topic of conversation, it really might. The truth is that most marketers see a higher return on investment when it comes to video than they do anything else. And a marketing agency very well would push you to do the video podcast. So then maybe the next question is, what's the cheapest way to do a video podcast? And I'm going to leave you on the hook. That's going to be our video for next week. What is the cheapest way to do a video podcast? All right, that's it for today. I hope that you enjoyed this video. If you did, please drop us a like. Again, it really just helps with the algorithm. We would love that help from you, our viewer. If you're not a subscriber today, please become one and smash that notification bell so that you're notified of all of our upcoming video content. Go follow us on our social media. We have both an Instagram and a Facebook page at Harbuck Media. Please go follow us there. Thank you so much for joining us today. We'll catch you next time.
Oh, fire and water me, going down deep. Say, oh, bury me, carry me, oh, far beneath. Down to the river.